right. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Schultz, and I am the Education Coordinator here at the Pence Gallery. Welcome or welcome back to our third year of the Pence's Art History Lecture Series. I'm really excited to have everyone here today. And of course, I would love to welcome our speaker who is kicking off the series for this year, Srđan Tunić. Srđan is an art historian and freelance curator from Belgrade, Serbia, currently doing his MA studies in art history at UC Davis. Since 2012, he has been working on artistic and educative projects, exhibitions, and research. Recently, his work is focused on the intersections of street art, queer theory, and activism. Last year, Srđan dived into the art and life of Mary Foley Benson at the Bohart Museum of Entomology and Shields Library, which has the biggest collection of this artist's work on the West Coast. And after this detective job through lectures and a forthcoming essay, he aims to share his findings with the public and bring this amazing artist back to public life. Now, I'm also personally excited to have Srđan here. You might be familiar with his name because he was our Exhibit Community Choice Award winner this summer. So he's also a wonderful visual artist. So it's nice to have him here back at the Pence. During his talk, I kindly ask that everyone keep their microphones muted and to reserve all comments and questions until the end of his talk. There will be a 15-minute Q&A session after his talk, during which you can use either the chat feature or you can unmute yourself to ask questions. And then also just a few logistics about Zoom. Just a reminder that if you would like to see only Srđan during his talk, make sure you go to View at the top and click Speaker View rather than Gallery View. And if you need closed captioning, I've enabled that on my end, so you can enable that on your end. This talk also will be recorded, and I can share that with everyone after via email. And with that, I will turn it over to Srđan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I see a couple of familiar names and faces. I would start with the presentation with the note that it's my aim to show who Mary Foley Benson was and tell you more about her artwork. So it will be more of a biographical approach in about, let's say, 30 slides. I love showing visual material, so I hope you would enjoy it as well. And I hope that I will, by the end, also encourage you to dive in some local archives and discover artists which are more or less similar to Mary. So let me start sharing my screen. And we just organize this nicely. Okay. Okay, hope everything is working out well. So today's talk is Plants, Insects, and Art, Mary Foley Benson Scientific Illustrations from UC Davis Collections. And let me just before I dive into how I started with this work, let me just tell you about the institution where this work is at the moment. So you might have heard for Bohart Museum of Entomology. It's a research institution at UC Davis, founded in 1946. It was founded when Professor Bohart gave 2 boxes filled with insects, like the ones you can see in the middle photo, to the museum, and now museum has about more than 7 million specimens. Apart from being a research institution and doing a lot of outreach activities, I would say that museum staff is very open to art initiatives. On the left side, we see a tardigrade sculpture that was set in front of the museum, I think in 2020. And apart from these millions of specimens of insects that you can see on the left photo, on the left side, museum also has some artworks. As you can see at the bottom right corner, they have a little exhibiting space in front where you can learn a lot about insects, but also they're very open to promote the artworks. We have one example in the upper right corner of an artist that we still haven't identified, for example, from their archive. So how this all started? When I came to UC Davis in fall 2021, I was very much interested to see all the exhibiting institutions around, all the museums and all the galleries. And I wanted to become an entomologist or a biologist when I was a kid. That didn't work out because I was very bad in natural sciences, but that love remains. And actually, one of my first loves was illustration, natural history illustration. So when I came to the museum, I was, fascinated what I had to see. But also, director of the museum, Lynn Kimsey, who you can see on the upper left corner, told me about some artists they were having, some Mary Foley Benson, and I saw a few of the paintings and said, okay, this is so interesting, I would like to learn more. So I applied with my art history department. I asked them to grant me the opportunity to have an internship there, which I did. So pretty much the whole last year, I spent researching Mary Foley Benson's work. So as you can see, Mary Foley Benson lived from 1905 to 1992. And how to find out about the person you never had a chance to meet, a person who doesn't have so much written sources about her, a couple of interviews and some archival material and artworks, but basically you don't have direct contacts and you can't find more about her. So I start, and in dealing with the artworks, which you can see on the right side, I needed to first find out who the person was so I can start filling the gaps and collecting the fragments. I was consulting a lot of archives and writing to a lot of archives around the United States. I spent a lot of time in Shields' library, that's the image in the middle, photographing her work and finding more information about her, and also researching the artworks in the Bohart Museum, which you can see on the right side. Luckily, a lot of material has been digitalized. However, you need to know where to look beforehand, because if you Google about her, you can find very little. Now you can find more, but 1 year ago, it's such little information that I was not sure will I be able to do the whole research. So Mary was born in 1905 in Iowa, and in early 1920s, she moved to the DC area to become an artist. So she was studying at the Concordia School of Art, and she graduated somewhere in late 20s and started working at the USDA. So it's United States Department of Agriculture. That's where the photo is from on the left. I think it's from 1925 or 1926. An amazing photo of her, which is available online. And what's interesting is that you can see her with tools of her trade in front of a canvas, which is actually not signed by her name. So she was probably making a blow up of another artist's work for some promotional events of USDA. And maybe in the background, we actually see one of her early artworks. We don't know so much about this photo and about the material which she was painting at the moment. But from late 1920s all the way to around Second World War, she was doing illustrations like you can see on the right side. So those were line drawings and some color images, but I would say less color images and more line drawings at the time. And here you can see some of the images which were made around Second World War. And this is something that she will be developing later on at UC Davis. You can see a life cycle of an insect and a plant that insects are using. So that's the host plant and the damage they're causing. In DC, in 1928, she married Russell Benson. Her family name is surname is Foley, so she became Mary Foley Benson, and they had a child, and they were living in the area all the way until Second World War. Now, this is a very interesting episode because she wanted to learn how to fly because her brother was in the aviation business. And she started with some lessons. And in one of the interviews, it was interesting because she said that the author of the article said that her husband didn't like her flying so much, so she was doing it in secret. And by late 30s, she had her pilot license. And when Second World War started, she was a volunteer, and she became part of the 99s. So that was the International Organization of Women Pilots, and also of the Air Force. And this is something I would really like to confirm with the military records, that she was probably one of rare women pilots at the time, if not the only one. So I can't say 100% with 100% accuracy, because recently I received some information from the military archives, and it's very little, especially because some of the military archives burned in early 70s. So a lot of information about the folks who were participating in Second World War is simply gone. But we have a couple of interviews and a couple of mentions where we can find information about Mary. The image on the left is not actually her, but it's the interview with a couple of women who were in the WAC, so that's Women Army Corps. Mary was flying, so she was doing transportation flights, but also teaching male pilots, teaching men how to fly. At that point, women were not allowed to teach in the air. And when that business finished, she said that she was kind of disappointed because they were also not paid as men pilots were. And there is a funny excerpt from one of the interviews saying that you can see on the right, "The Army put me in the rare bird file because of the need for people with my qualifications of both an illustrator and a flyer." She might have used an airplane that you can see on bottom right, a Piper, if I'm not mistaken. Entomologist Malcolm Furniss published an article last year where he documented her life and talked more about her piloting Second World War. A couple of things happened around Second World War. She stopped working for USDA. She moved out of DC area to live in California, in around the LA area where her family was living at the moment, and she divorced. So her child, John Benson, and her husband, Russell Benson, stayed in the DC area, and she needed to reinvent herself as a commercial artist in California. So she was working in Los Angeles, creating these wonderful botanical illustrations. And she was also working commercially and creating images of clowns. We haven't found those paintings yet. So if some of you are in LA area, you could probably find something about that. She was exhibiting all the way until mid-1960s when she came to UC Davis. So this is the main part of this lecture, which I found very fascinating and interesting. So this is the campus, I think more of a it's the south part, or maybe south west part of campus in 1964. She came on picnic day. Let me just remove this notification. She came on picnic day, and she was invited by Professor Howard Mackenzie, who was working at the Department of Entomology. And this is also her photo from that time. So what happened is that she was trying to find work, and Professor Mackenzie knew her illustrations from DC and gave her a call and gave her an opportunity to visit Davis. She was not sure where she stayed in Davis or not, but at the end she stayed in Davis all until her death. And she said that the feedback she got from people of Davis was wonderful, and that she really loved living here. Howard Mackenzie was an entomologist who was working on mealybugs, or scale insects. And this is one of the images she done for the publication. This is the image which was used for the cover of the book, Mealybugs of California, which came out in 1967, where you can see it's a diversity of mealybugs, of their species and habitats, which I found wonderful because she made them appear so nice and interesting. And if you know how they look in real person, I guess you have a different experience, a different feeling about it. So let's dive into some of these images. On the left side, you can see an image from published in the yearbook of yearbook of agriculture, I think it's called, about insects, by another artist. By another artist. So Mary's work was published there, and by Arthur Cushman. And what is interesting is that he did work which was also realistic, but with these more dramatic effects. You can see that there's this red, orange, and yellow background. But he used something that Mary would take on and use in the future, and that is this magnifying glass tool. So you can see the plant and the insects on it, but magnified, so you can actually see all of the details. I'm not sure, was this the invention of Arthur Cushman, or was it something which was present among the artists working, and maybe something that was used in previous centuries, most likely. But she started using this effect on the image in the middle, as you can see. So we can see the mealybug's habitat. You can see the host plants. We can see the surrounding area. This is UC Berkeley's Botanical Garden. And in the magnifying glass, we can see the mealybug in question. Now, what's interesting here, this is a watercolor. And in order for images like this to be of scientific use, you need to have everything documented. So you need to know not just the species of the mealybugs, but where they were collected. Of course, their scientific names, the year, the collector, and also the plants where they are feeding and when they were found. And interestingly, we can pinpoint the exact year. I think in this case, it's 1965, and the exact location where this happened. As you can see on the right side, all the information is available at the back of the painting. And this is how the material is documented in Shields Library, and for one part of the material in the Bochum Museum of Entomology. And at the bottom right, you can see the publication, how it looks with the cover jackets. Now, I wanted to show in this image how to juxtapose the mealybugs as she depicted them and mealybugs as they look in real life. So these are both the materials from the publication, Mealybugs of California. And I just wanted to pinpoint how, in a way, she portrayed them realistically, but also with such precision and a sense of beauty that I could not but not find these images so interesting. Again, mealybugs might not be the most interesting insects, and when I talk to people about Mary's work, they seem with how should I say? They're looking at me with question marks. But actually seeing these images in person, or seeing just the images of them, really proves how she was a very skillful artist, and how maybe in a way you need to make all these insects a little bit beautiful, so you can provide interest and a sense of wonder. So most of this work was made in, let's say, mid-60s. Professor Mackenzie died in 1968, just 1 year after this publication was published, and almost all of this material at the end ended up at the Shields Library and Bochum Museum of Entomology. There's another big group of artworks. So all of these artworks I'm showing you from UC Davis, there's about 150 of them. These are also watercolors made for another professor, for Professor W.H. Lang, also an entomologist with whom she was working. We're not sure, but definitely since her arrival to Davis from 1964 to 1972 when she retired. And it's a little bit of mystery what this series was exactly intended for. Professor Lang wanted to make possibly a publication about agricultural pests and their habitats, but the publication was never finished. So all of this work was never published, minus 2 images from the whole collection. So we're showing you something that you can otherwise see only if you come to Bochum Museum of Entomology. And what's interesting with this series is that she continued the formula she made with Mealybugs of California. We have the host plant, we have the insect, and we have the background. But what's interesting is that here she wanted to depict the whole life cycle, from the eggs to larva, these caterpillars to pupa, and to adults. In this case, we have moths. But what is also interesting is that we have all these details. So this is a whole lettuce farm in Davis with this whole farm setting. We see a tractor in the background and a water tower and so on. So some of the images were combined with landscapes, but some of them were more traditional botanical in entomological illustration, like the one on the right, with a white background, which emphasizes the species. But we're having the same formula. We're having the magnifying glass tool, caterpillars, pupa, and the species, the adult, which is the hornworm moth in this case. And depicting insect life cycles is not something new. On the left side, we have a famous example, Maria Sibylla Merian from the 18th century, who was portraying insects, mainly tropical insects. But again, we see the host plant and we see the whole life cycle. And on the right side, we have an example from the 19th century. I couldn't figure out who the author was, but you can see the life cycle depicted. What is unique with Mary is that she was depicting species which were typical for not just Davis, but California and maybe some other locations in the region. And let's go and look at some details. So on the left side, there's an illustration which was actually published. These flies are rice pests, and this is an enlarged image of the original illustration, where you can see these little flies in the magnifying glass too. And I just wanted to make sure that you can see all the details and all these effects on their wings, which look like almost like rainbow effects, being translucent at the same time. And while depicting insects, it seems that Professor Lang also wanted to extend the research, not just about insects and plants, but also to include other agricultural pests and also beneficial animals, beings, such as snails that we see on the right side. Mary did only 2 images of snails, so we're not sure at the end, was this just experimenting with ideas, or the scope of the publication was much larger. But all the images which are finished are mostly about insects and plants. And also to demonstrate how, or to try to let's do a comparison between how these insects actually look with her images, just to make sure how her working process looked. These are moths on both left and right side, and as you can see, they're very similar to the ones that she depicted, although she was trying to depict them with kind of maybe more colorful, but definitely with more focus. And the idea when doing scientific illustration is that you're not just depicting an actual insect, you're trying to depict the whole species. So once you see one of them, you can see you have the, let's say, ground zero image, the image that you can use for recognizing the insects you can see in person. And you can say maybe there's not so much difference that we can see here, but let's look at the other images. And these are the insects from the Bochart Museum, from their collection. I was fascinated when I found some of these images which were much enlarged than the original species. On the left side, we see a pirate bug, which is big only a few millimeters. And I was trying to look at this species under the microscope, and it looked different than Mary's image, but Mary made it very clear with all the legs present in such a vivid way that you can actually recognize the insects anywhere. And on the right side, we see a lacewing as well. So just to demonstrate that she needed to employ very close looking in depicting these insects and spent actually a very long time working with them. And here I would like to talk more about creating scientific illustration in general, because I think it's a background work which is often omitted when looking at these illustrations, especially if we don't actually have so much information behind it. So all we know is that she was growing plants, as you can see in the 1972 interview. She has been described by her neighbors as the only person who grows vegetables for bugs. Her backyard has a tomato crop, but the tomatoes are grown for insect rather than human consumption. And you can see a tomato plant on the left and Mary collecting the hornworms. So we knew that she was working with insects which were in the museum collection and insects that she was growing for painting them. Otherwise, how would you be able to actually draw a hornworm caterpillar that you can see in the middle if it's not alive? And on the right side, you can also see images of how insects are mounted in museum collections. Let's go on the other slides. So this is a reconstruction based on close looking at the material. We don't have her notebooks, we don't have her sketches, we don't have the process of how she came to these images left. Basically, what we assume, it's a kind of educated guess, that she was using compound microscopes, like the one in the middle, to really zoom on the insects themselves, and possibly using a tool called camera lucida. This was a technical and scientific and artistic tool used from the 19th century, I think maybe all the way until mid 20th century, where you could look at the image at the same time and draw a sketch of it. She might have used this. She might have used both of them in depicting the specimens you have seen, and she was mostly working with watercolors. Now, what's different? What's different than her work when she was doing just line drawings is that watercolors are much more complex. Where first you have color, but on the other side, they dry very fast. So in order to have a green leaf, you have these 8 colors, as we can see on the left, to make it. So it also shows that she was a very gifted colorist and a very, very precise worker. And also another example from the collections is this thread-waisted wasp that you can see at the bottom. So the piece of metal is the pin. And if you're interested to know how big it is, so you saw these 2 moths before, but here is actually the wasp. So it's when it comes to wasps, it's mid-size, but in general, when you look at them as specimens, they're actually very small. And she used some of these specimens to depict the wasp on the left. This is the image she did for a publication by Professor Richard Bohart and Arul Menke about specied wasps, which are kind of a predatory wasps feeding on caterpillars. They basically dig holes in the ground where they lay their eggs, and they put these caterpillars as food inside and then close them with a willow stone. A very interesting species. And so before getting to this, Mary was working in UC Davis since 1964 until 1972. And I was told by several people with whom I spoke about Mary that most likely one of the reasons that she stopped working at the time was the development of photography. As you can see in the next image, photography, let's say 100 years ago, was getting more professionalized and getting more precise. However, photography could not still be used for science as illustration could. One of the reasons is that illustration as such could depict insects with such precision and actually creates an insect with all characteristics of the species, while if you take a photo, some details might be lost. However, 100 years afterwards, we can see that images are made with such precision that they overrun the traditional illustration. This is a work by microphotography by Levon Biss, whose work you can actually see in front of Bochart Museum. And somewhere around Second World War, photography became so detailed that, and also became cheaper to make, and publications could actually reproduce images which were as precise as the original photos, that slowly traditional illustration started to be kind of pushed away. So what Mary did in the 70s, after she retired, she returned to her original love, which were plants. And this is mostly the work that people in Davis know about her. I guess there's a lot of this work in Davis and in the whole region that people have at their homes, because these are not just original watercolors. She did a lot of lithograph prints, as the one you can see on the right with the artichokes. And she was doing them commercially, but also and exhibiting them, but also I think as a passion project. An interesting example is the golden lupine that you can see on the left. So the City of Davis official flower. She gave this original watercolor in 1983, I think just after the flower was reconfirmed as the official city flower. And when she retired, one article said, "At last she can be free of bugs." Following a distinguished career as a scientific illustrator, she's still working at her easel, but now painting botanical illustration. She says she's enjoying painting flowers unharmed by insects. And this is another photo from one of her interviews where she's with a praying mantis called Myrtle that she was probably using for a sketch. We don't know what happened with this illustration. Did she ever make this illustration? Because there are no praying mantises in the archive. In the 80s, she was also very active. She had her solo exhibition, probably the largest and most important exhibition she made during her lifetime, at the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian Institution, where she used to work for the Smithsonian as well. This exhibition happened in 1983, and there was also an exhibition at her home in 1991. And a year later, she died, and the obituary said Davis has lost an artist and a true free spirit. So 3 decades later, we're not sure what happened with a lot of artworks which were exhibited at this exhibition in DC. All the artwork she made, or should I say most of the artwork she made as part of her UC Davis employment, ended up at Shields Library and their special collections, and at the Bochart Museum of Entomology. A lot of her botanical work, both before coming to Davis and after she retired, went to Pittsburgh. There is a Hunt Institute for Botanical Documentation, which have a collection of about maybe, I think, 60 works of hers. And one of the interviews said that she was preparing an autobiography. And it's still a mystery what happened to all of that material. Also in this picture, at the upper left corner, we see an image of a clown. She was doing clowns in LA area. We have no idea what happened to that. And I still haven't had the chance to actually go to Pittsburgh or to Washington, DC to see other material, her other illustrations. However, I found a lot of other artists during this process, and this is not just sharing, maybe some interesting information that I found during the process, but I would like to show you that she's not alone in this world. There have been a lot of women illustrators since the late 19th century, since the scientific world opened for women, but usually those works were technical, and it took a long time for women scientists to actually be on pair with their male colleagues. And this is all the work I would like also to show you, because it's around. These are all, in this case, these are all regional artists. Frida Abernathy was a regional artist. Celeste Green, in the middle, was an artist working for UC Berkeley. If you Google them, you can find very little information about them. Although I'm sure that their artworks are in some regional archives. On the right, we see Henry Evans, who was doing more fine art artworks, who is well known in the region. I think that his estate is managing his work today, and that some of his works are still offered for sale. However, you can't find so much information about either of these artists, not so many articles or analysis of them. Unlike some other, let's say, more famous artists, like you can see on this image, Sarah Plummer Lemon was the person behind naming the California dogface butterfly as the official state insect. There is Anna Botsford Comstock, who worked with her husband in a variety of publications, and she illustrated them all. She was very known as an educator, but also an artist. And there is Mary Walcott, who was also working in the DC area, like Mary Foley Benson, who had a prolific artistic career. And I think there is a traveling exhibition about her work, which is traveling either right now or will be traveling very soon, if you're interested to know. However, Mary and many other artists of her time, I think they were falling through the cracks because they were not scientists, they were not married to famous scientists, and they were not having well-known artistic career. Mary did work which ended up in many galleries. However, that was not the primary focus of her work. So you need to have in mind that that means that the artworks have limited circulation in the fine art world. On the other side, there are scientific publications and illustrations done for scientific publications, which are also circulating around, but for a very particular target audience, and which are usually not considered art per se. But this is not just something of the past. I spoke with Catherine Waters, whose work we can see on the left, an artist who is, I think, also present in this Zoom call. She met Mary Foley Benson in mid-80s, and told me that it was one of her early inspiration to dive into the botanical illustration. And what is interesting is that there is a renaissance of botanical illustration from 1970s all the way to today. However, this work is framed less in scientific terms and more in the fine art terms. We see work by Donna Bilic from Art and Science Fusion. This bee sculpture is at the Bee Haven, part of UC Davis, and there is if you see these mosaic works around the city, that they were done by Donna Bilic and collaborating artists. And this is also part of an initiative, Art and Science Fusion, and there's even a course about art and entomology by Professor Donna Diane Ullman, and she and Donna Bilic were collaborating on bridging this gap between science and art. And there are also younger illustrators and artists like Alan Chu, Talden Tops, whose work you probably saw if you were following Bochum Museum's events. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a plethora of artists that if you're interested in scientific, botanical, entomological illustration, that you can find around. If you are particularly interested in UC Davis, just to share some more information about it, there is a collection of apples by Ellen Isham Schutt, made in 1910s. That you can find them in the Shields Library. It was an attempt to systematize all different types of apples around the United States. It's a wonderful work, showing not just apples in their ideal state, but also apples as they're decaying. On the right side, you see two images from the WWII Museum. We see illustration from possibly 1970s or 80s by Lynn Kimsey, the director of the museum, who started actually as a scientific illustrator, and a photography by Larry Snyder. So if you're interested in this combination between this combination of insects and art, there's plenty of material around. However, sometimes it's hard to dive into the material if you don't know where to look or you don't have so much data to start with. I've spent a lot of time just digging through the archives, asking people, making interviews, and it took a lot of time, but it was a fruitful research because this almost like detective work paid off. And sometimes you just need time. And sometimes there are other people who are doing something similar that can actually help. On the upper right corner, you see a project made 3 years ago. Oh, now it's 4 years ago. Her Natural History, a celebration of women in natural history that was made as part of the Smithsonian Institution in Biodiversity Heritage Library. The idea was to digitalize material in the archives, to write something about that, publish it online, create Wikipedia pages for future researchers and for general public to know that they can refer to and use and use to spread, as I say, to spread the word about these wonderful artists and scientists. An easy thing could be to make a Wikipedia page. At the bottom right corner, you see a Wikipedia page about Mary Foley Benson, where you can find a lot of information that I shared with you today. I made this maybe like a month ago, and it can be updated with new information. And I think it's a nice way to share all the information that you find along the way, because I think it would be a shame that this information just remains in the archive after it has been researched, which is why I'm also doing this talk and sharing this information with you. And through this process, we might find out something more about certain illustrations or images like this one on the left. This is Mary at some point in her life, maybe during the 1980s. We have no date on this photo. We know that the images are from Mealybugs of California series. But when this happened, who is the person on the left? Those are all some questions. And I found out that as much as you're sharing this information, you collect feedback and you would eventually find more about it. And just to finish this talk, I would like to share with you some news which I discovered a couple of days ago. So in 2022, Professor Miller and Stokes published this article where they named, I think, 11 new species, including a species named after Mary Foley Benson. So you can see a line drawing on the left called Ovalticoccus Mary Foley Bensoni. So I don't know if a mealybug would be named after you, but this is a great honor in the scientific world. And I spoke with Dr. Miller, who said that the aim was to pay homage to, but also make visible all these people who were part of this huge collaborative scientific process. And Dr. Miller was a student and a young scientist at the time when Mary was working on the publication Mealybugs of California. So he also knew her and they worked together. And what's interesting is that he has some of the images which we never seen before. So like the image on the right, which might be how the Mary Foley Benson mealybugs actually look. They're similar. So all these images will end up at the museum, at the WWII Museum. There might be many more of these images, and this might be just a start of a beautiful journey. But it has been a very rewarding process because it enabled me as an international student to learn more about Davis and to learn more about University of California, but also about this particular person whose life resonated with many other lives in the 20th century, with many scientists, with many women illustrators who were working in the US at the time, and also being surrounded with these artworks who were maybe not digitalized or not being written about. And it's been a pleasure just to spread the word about this and to engage in discussions with other researchers or other people who might be interested in this kind of a work. So that's all from my side. There might be some information that I've skipped, or maybe I've said something that piqued your interest, but let me know if you have any questions. I'm glad to share any information about Mary Foley Benson. And let me stop talking and open the floor to other people.
Thank you so much, Srđan. That was such a fascinating talk. I loved seeing her early life, the details of her work, and how you connected it to other works by contemporary artists. But I'm sure other people have comments and questions, so you are welcome to either unmute yourself or you can type a comment in the chat. And I already see a hand, it looks like, for Catherine Waters.
Yes. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And it's nice to finally meet you, to see you, because we've only spoken on the phone. And I have to say, I was thrilled about a couple things. One, that you spoke about Maria Sibylla Merian, because those two women did share a number of things in common, especially the metamorphosis of caterpillars, and also the fact that they were so focused on the relationship of insects and their host plants. So I'm glad you made that comparison. The other thing was so great to hear that a species was named after her. Every scientist or artist dreams to have a species named after you. And I so wish she had known that. And well, maybe she does. Maybe she does know it. But I do have a question for you. Are those originals at the Bohart Museum?
Yes, thank you, Catherine, for being here today. And it's nice to see you and meet you visually as well.
Visually.
You helped me in this research. As I said, I spoke with a couple of people, and somebody mentioned you as someone who knew Mary Foley Benson, who met her. And actually talking with you as an artist, as an illustrator, helped me understand a little bit the background process, or at least made me research it more, since I'm not really an artist. I know Catherine Schultz from Pence would disagree, but I'm trying to be a little bit modest here. All of the works in Bohart and in Shields are originals. There are some prints, like the plants that you saw at the very end, that she did in the 70s, but all the images with insects are originals, are watercolors.
Is it easy for a person like me, I'm actually a UC Davis graduate, to be able to go there and see them? Would I be able to?
So that's a question. I'm not sure, because I think you need to be in a university system to access them, at least when I think of the Shields Library. I'm not sure, but I'm here until June. If anybody's interested to see some of the works in person, we can go to the Bohart Museum together and see them. They are sometimes exhibiting some of this work as part of their events. I think it's a little treasure that they have. And these works are not permanently displayed because, number one, Shields has a lot of works and there's not enough space to display them all. And Bohart Museum is not a real exhibiting institution. And if they had more space, I believe that they would, frame them all and put them everywhere. But that's something that I believe will be resolved in the future.
Okay. Well, it would be lovely to see them with you. So maybe we can make, if other people are interested, we could do that as a little group.
I agree. Good. I was doing a couple of tours before. I'm all open for that. And I guess people from Bohart will be also interested. We can do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Looks like Carrie Sinaceros has a question. Hi, Carrie. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Oh, so fascinating. I really appreciated hearing about so many things. I wanted to ask if you were familiar with Barbara Todd Kennedy. Maybe if you continue your research on women illustrators. She's in the Bay Area, passed away quite a long time ago, but her background was orchids and the whole life cycle of the orchid. And all of her watercolors have ended up in the Smithsonian now, all her originals. But she's a very fascinating woman because she also added little bugs into her big, but they're large watercolor paintings. And she did them all in her greenhouse. The other thing I wanted to just put a little plug in, you showed a photo of Larry Schneider's, he's helping with some work there at the Bohart photo documentary, bugs in North Davis drainage ditch, which is right near my house. And we're having a solo show of his photos from last season, or the one he had there at the Bohart Museum on display, and what he's doing this next season at the Logos Books used bookstore next January 2024. So if any of you really like bug photography of this particular bugs, that's where we're going to have a show of his work too. But thank you for all your research. This is very exciting.
Thank you, Carrie, for sharing this information with us. Can you just type the name of the first artist you mentioned? I might have seen her, and this is the interesting part of this process. You start with one person, and then there are 5, and then there are 50. And maybe like 10% of them are well-researched, I would say, from what I've done. Barbara Todd Kennedy. No, I haven't seen her, but I will write her down. And, I think that there is enough material to make, an exhibition about, women illustrators in the Bay Area or in California, whether we just talk about plants or we talk about insects. So there's a lot of material out there. That's what I want to say, and maybe encourage you to dive into some local archives or just work with artists which are available, because I think this is a wonderful topic.
I agree. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Srđan?
And also just to mention, if any of you knew Mary, contact me. I believe that there are much more people who knew her, and there's a lot of her artworks floating around than we know. And all of this information is kind of just like contributing to like piecing this puzzle and getting all these fragments together. And every time you learn something new, and I think that knowing and sharing can be 2 different things, and I wanted to combine them in this case. So it might I don't know, maybe might inspire other people to pursue similar work, or just to appreciate what they have. I believe that other people knew that there is Mary Foley Benson before I came to Davis, of course, but simply it just takes a little bit of very focused time, and or actually a lot of focused time just finding information about this, and at the end, like sharing it so it can communicate with other people. Let me just see, there's some messages. Thank you. Yes, mealybugs, when I have them on my flowers and on my plants, I'm not happy, but when I see these images, they are, they look amazing.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. If you don't have any questions, we will probably wrap up, but I so appreciate everyone coming today and for being enthusiastic about this topic. And of course, thank you again to Srđan for doing this lecture and for being a part of the series. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and come to the next talk in February if you would like to. It'll be on Indigenous Art and Archaeology with Isabel Guerrero.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Catherine, and Pence Gallery for supporting all of this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.